Hi, I'm Drew.
I'm Harley.
I'm Nancy, and we're the Bound in Book podcast. You can expect a fun time, some curse words, and a lot of discussion. Our episodes will both feature guests and be conversations between the three of us.
We do intend to stay spoiler-free for the majority of our shows. Our guest episodes will feature a spoiler section towards the end. We are here to be an author, reader, and industry-at-large safe space to discuss books, opinions, and feelings. But we are going to keep it positive.
We want listeners to know that we are not here to bash your favorite stories or authors, but may discuss things we didn't like too. And we hope you join our discussion over on social media and enjoy the episode.
Today, we'll be speaking with Sheila Masterson, the author of the Lost Gods series. Sheila Masterson is a project manager by day and a tarot reader and fantasy romance writer by night. When she's not busy slinging cards and words, you can find her practicing yoga or curled up reading a fantasy or romance book. She lives outside of Philadelphia with her fiancé and way too many houseplants.
To give you a little taste of the series, here's a brief synopsis of The Lost God. Two kingdoms vying for an ancient power, one witch on the verge of releasing it, but all magic requires an exchange. Memory witch Cecilia is used to sacrificing for power. She's exchanged her blood for memories, her pride for respect at court, and her forbidden and unrequited love for her guardian, Raynor, for the sake of her duty. It will all be worth it if she can complete the gauntlet and release the power of the lost god. But when the god of war attacks, sending two kingdoms from simmering tension to open war, Cecilia and Raynor set out on one final perilous journey. They venture deeper into enemy territory than ever before, aided by a charming hunter who offers Cecilia a glimpse of the adventure and romance she's always wanted. As the trio encounters vicious memory-stealing hunters, enchanted illusion forests, and meddling gods who speak in riddles, they draw even closer to the pinnacle of the gauntlet, and the sacrifice that Cecilia has been dreading. When faced with the most important magical exchange of her life, Cecilia must choose between her kingdom and her heart, knowing that one will be left irreparably broken.
All 4 books in the series can be found on Kindle Unlimited, starting with The Lost God. Sheila, thank you so much for being here with us today. I'm so excited that you're here.
I'm so excited to be here. If there is one thing I love, it's a microphone.
Perfect. Oh my God, 3 Leos in a podcast.
I was just about to say that.
God's bless Nancy, okay?
I know Nancy agreed to do this podcast with me and Drew, so...
Nancy, just you gotta elbow your way in through all the Leo talking here. I'm so sorry.
All right.
So, what are you guys reading right now?
I'm reading Guild, the first book in the Plated Prisoner series.
Have you read it before?
I've never read it. I
Nice.
started reading it at the beginning of my fantasy journey, and I didn't like it because it made me feel icky.
Okay, I felt the same way when the first time I tried to read it.
But then I realized I was like, oh, okay, that's the premise. I just need to keep going. So I'm enjoying it so far. I'm 60% through.
She takes a strong start real seriously. Like the opening, I still remember reading the opening of that book and being like, oh, okay, here we go.
Yeah. So
yeah.
Nancy, have you read it or no?
No, I haven't.
Okay, then I won't get into what the opening scene is. But the opening couple of scenes, you read it and you're like, I don't know about if this is for me. And then I was like, no. Remember what the summary said. Just push through. And I try it when I'm reading stuff, I try to get to at least 50% before I make a call either way. And I'm really glad I did because I love those books.
Yeah,
so excited to read the rest of the series.
Sheila, what are you reading?
I am reading A Reaper at the Gates, which is the third. Well, I'm reading 3 different things, as always. A Reaper at the Gates, which is the third Ember in the Ashes series book, which is by Saba Tahir. And it came out, the first book came out in 2016. It has been on my list, my break in case of emergency list. And I've really been struggling to read this year just because I have been doing so much editing. So I finally got the books from the library on audio. And first of all, the audio is elite. It's so good. The narration is so good. And Saba Tahir is so talented. I was like riveted to the first book. I was just so sucked in, and I listened to it in like, I think like 3 days, and it's like a very long audiobook. It's like 16 hours or something. So I was really like in the zone, and I've blown through, I'm at like 80% of the third book right now, and something horrible is about to happen. Like I can feel it. But this series is so good. It's so dark. I can't believe that it's like categorized as YA, but I have feelings about why books by women are categorized as YA when they're like definitely not. It's not super, this is how I also know it's really good. I read almost nothing that isn't like very romance heavy. And this series has romantic subplots, but they are very minor to the story. The larger story has nothing to do with that. And it is so good. Oh my gosh. I'm like, can't recommend it enough. It's excellent. And then I'm also like physically reading Dear Writer, Are You in Burnout by Becca Syme. She's a writing coach, and she basically talks about sustainability across the course of your career. And that is more of like, that's kind of like my craft book right now, even though it's more like business minded than craft minded. And then I'm also reading an arc of A Rose by Any Other Name by Mary McMinn, which is sort of like a historical reimagining of the woman that Shakespeare wrote his sonnets about. And Mary McMinn wrote a Rapunzel retelling that I read like 2 years ago and just loved, like was very obsessed with. So I'm also really enjoying that.
Fun. I just added an ember in the ashes to my Libby
Okay.
holds because you were
And
convincing me so hard.
and send me messages. The only person I know who has read it is Sylvie. And so I've been like in her DM. Actually, Sylvie and my critique partner Liz have both read it. So I've been like messaging them as I like freak out over parts of it because they're the only people I know, and I don't want to post stuff because like the twists and stuff are so good that like I don't want to like risk somebody else getting spoiled. So I've just been messaging them and like privately freaking out.
Okay, I'll freak out with you when I start it.
Yes,
I
absolutely.
also just wrote it down so I remember. But Sheila, was it you that I was messaging and I was like, "Oh yeah, this book is about a different book. This book is a Rapunzel retelling," and that's when I learned I didn't know anything about what Rapunzel was actually about.
Yes, exactly, exactly. And I would say that Book of Gothel is like a very loose Rapunzel retelling. It is very like witch in the woods, and that's why I loved it because it's very witchy and very feminist. Um, so I also really recommend that, but it's a really different style. Like that's a little more like literary, I would say.
Okay. Nancy, what are you reading?
Oh, I am still. I'm gonna say I know you're laughing because you already know my answer. I'm still fighting through a reading slump. I was gonna say slump, and honestly, it's more like just a life slump. Like I'm just exhausted nonstop, so I haven't had the mental space to read. So I'm still reading Forever Rain. Fine. I passed 50% last night though, and I'm loving it. And I'm definitely really excited to finish, but also still don't want to because I won't be able to read this for the first time again.
Yeah.
But
I
that I should finish it. Like if I don't finish it before the weekend, I will finish it on Saturday during my hair appointment because I'm sure I'll have plenty of time.
I
Um,
struggle so hard with like zooming through books because the three of you guys know I read really, really fast. So usually like especially for our core group of authors that we're frequently reading, I pick up the book and I don't stop until I put it down or until it's like 3 a.m. and I have to go to sleep. But it makes me so sad sometimes. I'm like, oh, this is the last book. I had this issue with Sheila with your book. I had this issue with Vanessa's book. I'm sure I'm going to have it with Helen's when her last book comes out, with Penn's when her last book comes out. And I'm going to zoom through it. I'm going to be so happy because I want the story. And then I'm going to be like, oh, but now it's over.
Yeah. I get this. I'm the same way. I get really like into something and then I'm like, oh, where did it go?
Yeah.
I'm the same way, and then I go and I buy everything I can afterwards because it's the only thing keeping me in the world. I'm like, well, what can I buy? What can I attach to myself?
Well, if you're ever running out of things to buy, Drew, you can buy me stuff. And you can just go shopping in my Amazon wish list and then purchase things
That
for
is
me.
so generous. So generous of you, Harley.
I know. I wouldn't want my friend to not be able to focus on stuff. So
Yeah,
Right,
you're such a
right.
giver.
She really is. I'll make sure to keep that in mind. Harley, what are you reading?
um I am currently reading an arc that is the 4th book in a series. It's one of the authors I'm on a street team for, H.E. Bauman, and the book is Beyond Veiled Destinies. It's an arc of her book that's coming out, and it is, how do I explain it without giving any spoilers? So it follows a woman named Astria who has magic that is incredibly powerful, and the first book starts out with her hiding that magic because she was avoiding being conscripted into the military, and she winds up being really good friends with the royals, and then she is assigned to a project with the son of the king who was a childhood friend of hers. So we've got like a little childhood friends to question mark to lovers situation going on, and they're really cute. I'm not like normally a cinnamon roll guy type of girl. I like my men to be a little bit mean to me, right? And so the main male character in this is like totally a cinnamon roll, but he's also like a badass outside of their relationship, but he's just like a little cinnamon roll inside their relationship, and it's I'm surprised by how much I really enjoyed that. And so the book is Beyond Failed Destinies. I'm really excited to be reading it. It comes out at the end of June. Yeah, I think June 24th.
That cinnamon roll comment just reminded me a lot about Rainer. Just to talk about the Lost God a little bit. He was like another one of those like really like sweet characters where I was like, I don't think I can do this. I also kept imagining him blonde in the beginning. I don't know why I did that. And I was like,
um,
"Ugh, this nice blonde man, there's no way." But I love him now. I love him a lot.
Sheila, I need you to know that I was shocked, and I've read all 4 books. I was shocked to find out in the 4th book that Cece is not blonde.
Harley!
I thought she had blonde hair, and she doesn't.
Oh my
Okay, look,
god.
in my defense, I also thought Graylin was a blonde until yesterday.
Why? What is it with you guys and thinking everybody is blonde? I assume everybody has dark hair until proven otherwise.
Okay, normally I do. I think what threw me off specifically about Cece is we hear about her blue eyes over and over again, and typically that is not a trait associated with dark-haired people. That's typically a blonde-haired trait. Those, so I think that's what threw me off. And then someone made a comment in the one of the books, I think it might have been Rainer, said something about her like dark curly hair, and I was like, "What the fuck are you talking about, bro?"
That's funny.
I'm dead. I'm dead. Okay.
So,
I thought Rainer was blonde because I I'm so sorry, Sheila, but I just was, like, imagining, like, a Tamlin situation.
Listen, it's not the first time I've heard it. I've heard all kinds of comparisons, but usually just from people who've read book 1.
Yeah, no, immediately after book 1, that's, like, an incorrect thought. I was like, "Who was that girl? What was she thinking? That's insane."
But I also kind of like that. Like I like that there are people who are like, I will never change my mind about this character. And then like a book and a half later they're like, wait, did I just change my mind?
So this is obviously spoiler free because we're in the spoiler free section. I thought Rainer was a dick in the first book, and I didn't. I appreciated him for the relationship that he had with Cece, but I thought he was a dick. So
Yeah.
I was really glad that after spending more time with him and more time in his head, that I felt differently about him. Come the
Yeah.
wrap up of the series.
Well, I think I'm trying to think of what I can say that's like not a spoiler. I think like when it came to writing the first book, I originally wrote it in um like multi POV, the way that book 2 is. I originally like started to write it that way and then realized that I couldn't write it that way and keep like the integrity of the story because basically everybody in the first book is keeping secrets. I don't really think that's a spoiler. And it would have felt like lying to the reader, which is not a thing that I wanted to do because it just wasn't believable that we could have gotten through the entire book and they wouldn't have been thinking about the secrets that they were keeping at all until like the moment it came up. And I've read books like that. I won't name any names. Where like I just was like ready to like throw my Kindle and not in like the good way where you're like, oh my God, I'm so mad right now. Like in the, okay, like you said the entire book, this character didn't have magic and suddenly they have magic kind of way. And so I really needed to like be intentional about that. So that's part of the reason why the first book, with the exception of the epilogue, is just in Cece's point of view, because I needed to kind of control the focus of the story a little bit more. And because of that, I really sacrificed a lot of understanding of both of the male characters. But especially Rainer, because he is much more private about what he's thinking and how he's feeling. And because of that, I think he like really takes a beating in the first book, like in terms of likability. A lot of people just really do not like him in that book because you only have Cece's perception too. And Cece is very much a character who like sees an obstacle and is like, this is the problem. This is the thing that's in my way. And so because she's directing the narrative the whole time, we only have Rainer the obstacle, you know what I mean? And her kind of perception of things, which like we find out later, you know, from both male point of views, that it's like not everything is how it looks like it is to her.
That's so genius, Sheila. Like, I truly never thought about that that perspective that we couldn't get the other POVs. Like, it makes me appreciate the whole series so much more.
I did think about it once we had some other POV characters. I was like, oh, that's interesting. I wonder why we didn't get this the first book. And then I actually thought a little bit about it and I was like, oh yeah, it's because everyone was keeping secrets. And there's no
Yeah.
way we could have been legitimately in their head and not had any of that come up.
Totally. And you can make a case for every character being a little bit of an unreliable narrator, the way that all of us are when we talk about our lives, because we only have our point of view and we only have the things that we can see and we all have our biases coming in. But I think like books 2 through 4 benefit from having multiple points of view because you get a more clear narrative when you have multiple opinions kind of coming into the story. You can find like the thread of truth at the center of that a little bit easier than you can when it's just coming from her. So that was like one of the tricky things about the first book coming out is I'm always like, can we just read the first book and then like come back to me.
Yeah, so speaking of which, you have mentioned previously, like in other interviews, that you completed the series before the first book ever came out. So, can you talk a little bit about what your writing process was? Did you just have the plot line that was all written out, or did you have like full rough drafts, or what did that look like for you?
Yeah, so I, if you've ever heard Pen talk about her process and me talk about my process, we're like opposites, where I am not a plotter at all. She's like a super intricate plotter, and I'm not. I kind of see, I have like the larger beats of the story. So I usually have, when I first started this, I had like what happens at the very beginning to kind of set them on the journey. I had the midpoint of book one. And then I had how book one ended, which is kind of like also giving me how book two starts. And I had the midpoint of book two and the final piece of book two. And I kind of just was writing from sort of like writing from like mile marker to mile marker. Like I would write a little bit and I would wait and see what else came to me. And this thing happens. At the time I had been reading a lot, and I think a lot of people are surprised how much we like internalize stories, and we start to get a feel for like what's supposed to be happening at this part of the story, not necessarily specifically in the scene, but we kind of know what it looks like to wait for like the rising tension of the story, and we know that something big happens at the midpoint, you know. And so I kind of had a feel for this, and even in my first draft of The Lost God, it was almost like perfectly paced to have like the midpoint almost exactly at 50%. I think it was at like 51% or something. And I kind of managed to, I say it's kind of like being a discovery writer, where I write a couple chapters and then I have to like sit down and really think about where I'm going and how I'm going to close that distance most efficiently. And so it was a lot of doing that. And because I wrote it that way, I always have to go back and then do like what I call a reverse outline, which is basically going back through all of the scenes and all of the chapters in the book that I've written and looking for all of the different character arcs, the primary plot arc, the secondary plot arcs, and seeing where everything falls in, and then start to clean it up a little bit. So I have a lot of editing work to do when I finish a story. And for this series, I drafted basically from January until I think October, like the beginning of October of 2021. I drafted books 1 through like halfway through book 4. And like literally like a fever. I had ideas, and I just kind of kept going. And I said I would stop when I ran out of road. And I was having a hard time with book 3 because I thought that the series was a trilogy, and I discovered as I was talking to my critique partner Tanya that it like I kept trying to fit all of the stuff into the third book, and she was like, "I think it's 4 books," and I was like, "Oh my god, you're right." And as soon as she said it, I could see where the third book ended and the fourth book began. So I basically just kind of like wrote it all. I wasn't necessarily thinking, oh, I'm going to publish this. I just was like, hey, I wonder if I could write a book. And also, I'm really anxious because this was all during COVID. And I had a lot of time on my hands. My fiance is a journalist, and he was working really long hours covering all of the COVID stuff. And my sister was a nurse, so she was working like, she worked late nights, and she ran the COVID unit, and she would call me every night on her break and like talk to me. And so I would write until I talked to her, and then I would like take a little break and talk to her, and then I would come back and write some more. And like, it just was a place to like bring my focus while all of that was happening. So I kind of just wrote through those books, and then I took a pause in November of 2021 to write my book that's coming out this fall, because it had been kind of like burning in the back of my brain for a while. And then I finished book 4 in early 2022. And I was really nervous about anybody reading them, but I sent it to my friend Tanya, and I have been friends. She is a writer also, and we've been friends since high school. And we had started talking a lot during COVID and going on like long walks and just like talking about stuff on the phone. And so I told her, I was like, hey, I wrote, I might write this thing. I had already written all 4 books. And I was like, I might write this thing. And she was like, oh, that's great. And I was like, I might have written it already, and I might send it to you. And she was like, oh, okay. And so I sent it to her, and she was kind of like my cheerleader from day one. And she helped me kind of clean up my writing. God bless her. It was so bad. That first draft was so bad. Now I can laugh because it truly was horrendous. But then I started cleaning it up, and I was like, do I have something here, like for real? Um, and I guess like in like late 2022, I decided like, yeah, why not? I'll just publish it. So when I published The Lost God in April 2023, I had book 1 and 2 both pretty much edited, and pretty much ready to go. And all of the other books were written. And I think that The Storm King, which is the third book, was through like one developmental edit, or it was about to go through one developmental edit. So, and for anybody who doesn't know, a developmental edit is basically like the story edit, which is looking at the larger plot of the story and just cleaning it up.
I'm so curious to know how bad your version of bad is when you said that, like, your first draft was, like, so horrendous. Because I mean, well, we are obviously seeing the final version, you've probably gone through it with a fine-tooth comb, but it's I don't know, yeah, it just reads so wonderfully, the plotting is I mean, the pacing is perfect, like, the character development is amazing, and, like, how was it bad? What was bad?
I'm also wondering, like, if I'm Tanya, how do I, like, tell my friend who's been my friend for, like, a really long time, like, "Hey, there's some stuff you gotta change because this isn't great."
Oh my gosh, she's so good at it, honestly. She's super, super positive. Okay, I'm trying to think of what she said initially. So I didn't know how to like come into and out of a scene, for example, which is a hard skill. Some people are really good at it, like naturally, and some people are not. And I really was not. That was a muscle that I had to learn. Um, but it was stuff like, I mean, on a line level, the writing just was not there. I didn't know how to stay in like active voice, which you probably hear a lot of people talk about, like passive voice versus active voice. And the problem was that it was just so long. Like my first draft was so long because I also didn't know how to end a chapter without them like going to sleep. So it'd be like, I'd write like a full day, which is not how books are, you know?
Oh.
Um, so when I say it was bad, it was like actually not great. And once I scraped out all of the excess, then it was much closer to the story as it is now. So like huge parts of the story didn't change necessarily. It was just mostly like doing some cleanup. So I think the first draft was like 172,000 words, which is extremely long. And I cut out like about 30,000 words, I think, for the final draft.
That's a lot of words.
It is. And she just pointed out some things. Like she told me a lot of stuff about passive versus active, but my fiance is also a journalist, like I said, and he is way less nice about it. He will just be like, this is terrible. And he'll go again, still in a kind way, but like just he'll be like, fix that like this but better. Actually his comments and stuff make me laugh sometimes when I go through because I'm like, I know what he means. But he's used to being, I think, like very blunt, like when he edits things for work. So sometimes I'll be like, be nicer. Be
Well,
nice to me.
I feel like it's helpful to have someone with kind of that outside, but also similar industry experience who like, is there for you. Like, he's not gonna tell you something unless he really thought it was going to make your work better, so he doesn't have any
Totally.
other, like, ulterior motives. Even though maybe it may not be the most kind way to say it, that, like, oh, he wouldn't say that if he didn't really, like, think this needed to be changed.
Well, I've jokingly said that I had this fear, like when I was putting the book out, that it was going to be like, I don't know if you all remember the first season of American Idol, like where there were all these people who came on and they like genuinely thought they were really good at singing. And like nobody had ever been nice enough to tell them that they weren't. And it was so, I'm like super empathetic. And I just remember watching that and being like horrified that nobody was kind enough to tell them that like they just were maybe like not a singer, like professionally, you know? Um, and I was like, is this going to be like an American Idol situation where just everybody in my life is too nice to tell me that this is terrible? Because I don't know. I think it's great, but like I have no objectivity in this.
I think about American Idol tryouts far more often than I ever should, especially those first like 3 or 4 seasons. They're live rent free in my brain.
I'm glad it's not just me, but I say that sometimes, and I'll message Liz, who is one of my critique partners now, and I'll be like, "Is this an American Idol situation?" And at first, she was like, "I don't know what you're talking about." And then last year, when her book came out last year, she was like, "I finally know what you mean because I feel like that now." And I was like, "Yeah, dude, see, it's not just me."
I love Liz. Everything I've seen about her, interaction I've had with her has been so delightful.
She is very funny.
Yeah, she was the only person who was hyping up my love of Pierce Brown,
She's a huge fan.
as she should be. That is the only appropriate reaction to have.
Sorry, Harley. I had to look up who Pierce Brown is.
Oh my god, did you
Um,
find his Instagram? Because he's got pics in a bathtub.
Hmm.
oh wait, I'm sorry not to
He has some
depart.
thirst trap pics, yeah.
He's got some thirst trap pics.
Oh my god. Okay, fine. I'll read your book, Pierce Brown. Okay.
I
I
mean,
Drew,
will
you
be
he's
probably
selling it.
really
He
like
is
it.
marketing, you know?
he knows what
Listen,
the
Respect the
people
hustle.
want.
he
Yeah.
knows what
Yeah.
the people want, but also, guys, his books are real good. They're not like trash. They are real good.
I know, I've heard such
Okay.
good things. They're on my list.
They, as someone who only read the first one, so I shouldn't say books, the first one at least is very good, but all the others I've heard are very good. Um, they should have gotten the Hunger Games got. Like wholeheartedly. They deserved the Hunger Games treatment. The world building and everything is incredible, but I think like we just weren't ready yet to
Yeah.
accept that.
It's also sci-fi, right? I feel like it can be really tough depending like how the genre is doing at the moment.
It's like a dystopian sci-fi, so there's
That's what I was
also
thinking.
yeah, so there's also several like really similar elements to the Hunger Games. So like once the main character kind of leaves his home, he's thrown into this whole new world and this competition where he has to win an apprenticeship with powerful people. And he does
Okay.
that. Um, you're supposed to do it by basically like stabbing everyone else in the back and coming out on top, but he really, really wants to do it by collaborative properties. And it's really, really well written and it's really interesting. And it's very easy to forget that our main protagonist is only 16 years old. He's only 16. So it is YA, but it's very, the themes and the situations are very adult. They're very
Okay.
violent. Very good though. I had a good time
Nice.
reading it. Yeah. It's called Red Rising for anyone listening.
But putting it on there.
Oh, I totally forgot we didn't even mention the title. That's hilarious. Anyway, okay, getting the train on the tracks. Just talking about like your editing process. It sounds like you had a lot of scenes that you had to delete potentially. Were there any scenes that you cut that you wish you could have kept in for fun? Like maybe they didn't add to the plot, but they were just like fun.
Yeah. There are so many. And if I could if I could go back and talk to myself now, I probably would have left like one or two of them in The Lost God. Um, just because now I'm like, I probably could have kept that. Um, I guess I'm trying to think of how to talk about these without spoiling them. So let me look at my notes. Okay. So there was a couple scenes. There was a little bit more time in Olney originally, which is where they start out at the beginning of The Lost God. There was a little bit more time before they left on the journey to like finish the gauntlet originally. And there were some more interactions with Xander and Cece before she leaves to try to finish the gauntlet. And there was in particular a training scene like where they're sparring that I really, really loved and was so sad to have to cut. That I would definitely, I still have it somewhere and I would keep it for maybe like a special edition someday or some sort of special occasion because I really like that scene. There is also the for anybody who has read The Memory Curse, this is not really a spoiler for anybody who hasn't. The spicy scene with the rose that they refer to in the book was originally written out and in there, and I cut it for for timing and also because it would have been unhinged to have a spicy scene to start the second chapter of the sequel. That just would have been like very intense, even for me. So I had to kind of like restructure a couple things in the beginning of that book. And unfortunately, that scene was the casualty, but it is very fun. And then there's honestly, like through the series, a lot of scenes with Xander and Cece that I either had to like cut down or cut because they have a way of really like running away with a scene, their banter, and they have kind of like an incendiary kind of chemistry that sometimes I'd be like, oh my gosh, why am I still in this like bantery part of the scene? Like so much stuff needs to happen here. And I'm getting like caught up in the two of them flirting because that's just kind of how their relationship is. So a lot of the stuff that ended up on the cutting room floor of these books was like the two of them being ridiculous. But those scenes are really fun. So I keep everything. Everything that I cut, I keep in like a cuts document in my files. So I have everything. It's just a matter of like finding the right opportunity to share it and then also making sure that it doesn't, because not everything made it through to later versions of the book, making sure it doesn't like contradict anything that happens in the story that I changed, you know.
Okay, I wish you could see my face because my jaw is on the floor. I'm literally just imagining no, when you said the rose scene, I was like, "Oh my god, yes." I remember exactly what you're referring to, and I did really enjoy how you did it, like, I feel like it was still, like, spicy enough where I'm like, "Oh, this is nice, but we're not reading, like, a whole scene right now in the beginning of the book."
Mm-hmm.
But okay, couple things. 1, if you start a Patreon, I will subscribe.
We're just here
I
to get everyone to start a Patreon.
I'm here on my knees. I'm begging for a Patreon. I want to read those scenes. I'm hacking into your computer as we
I
speak.
thought
Don't think about
I
it.
thought for sure that that scene was going to win because I let my ARC team pick a bonus chapter for that book, and I thought for sure that that scene or a scene toward the end of the book from an alternate point of view would win, and neither of them won. Everybody wanted to see a meet cute between two of the side characters, so I was like very shocked, but that's just how it went.
I think I joined your ARC team for the Storm King, so I
Okay.
was not a part of that yet, but that's why. It's because I wasn't there.
It's
It's because
because
Harley
you
wasn't
weren't
there.
there.
Yeah, I wasn't there
It's like
yet.
we were the 2 votes that would have pushed it over the edge, I think.
No, I thought for sure that scene or the alternate POV of the ending of that book would have won, and I was very shocked when they didn't.
I hopped on the Sheila train right. It was whenever Tay did her book club for The Lost God. So I think it
Oh
was right
yeah.
when The Memory Curse was coming out.
Okay. Okay, that makes sense. Yeah. So it's back, yeah, like November.
It feels like it was so much more recent, but we're 3 whole books later.
I know.
You push them out pretty fast too. Like it feels like I've been living with these characters for like years and years, but you technically you published all by the time you publish The Godless Kingdom, will it have been like a year and you published all 4 books?
It'll be like 14 months, yeah, from
Oh, wow.
start to finish. Yeah, which is a lot.
Wow, that's amazing. Do you know, like, normally what the average, like, publishing time is for a series?
Oh yeah. I mean, in traditional publishing, it's like one book a year, honestly. It's pretty unusual to do more than that, but indie, it really depends on the author and, stuff like whether they write full time or part time. I work full time. I have a full time day job and I write, so I'm probably not forever going to be putting out, 4 books in a year. That's not sustainable, um,
Dang
but
it.
because I had pre-written all of these, I know, listen, nobody is more disappointed than me because I have so many things that I want to write and put out, and I like can never quite keep up with all the ideas that I have.
We'll just have to buy enough of your books, and hype you up, more so you can quit your full-time job.
That would be great. I support it.
Okay, everyone, you hear that? The goal for 2024 is to get Sheila to quit her full-time job so she can just give us the books that we want all the time.
Sheila, you know what would help? Starting a
What?
Patreon.
Starting a Patreon! Yes!
Oh my God.
So, Sheila, these characters each have so much depth and humanness to them that I've been told feels so different from any romantic fantasy. And in Discord, we've spoken about how The Lost God does deviate from the usual romantasy in some ways. What inspired these characters and this series, and what, in your opinion, makes it different from a usual romantasy?
This is such a good question. So I think I read between like 2020 and 2022, I read something like, I don't know, like 400 or so romantasy books. I read a lot. And I felt like I was getting, not that I don't like these things, but I felt like I was getting a lot of similar characters in that it would be like the broody, alpha, morally gray hero, and like the unaffected, like badass heroine who just like is totally like chill about like mountains of trauma happening in the book. And I was always like, this just does not feel accurate to me. Like I like it and I aspire to it, but I don't necessarily relate to it. And I really wanted to write a softer, more sensitive heroine. Um, like somebody who is Cece is like very affected by all the things that happen around her. She's very empathetic. Um, and I feel like often in fantasy books that is really looked down on and
Mhm.
like it's like a thing that only side characters get to have or like the character that gets protected at all cost gets to have and I really wanted to write a heroine that was a little softer, like still badass and still you wouldn't want to mess with her, but also a little more sensitive. She's definitely very emotional. And I also wanted to write heroes that were flawed, but still like good people underneath, and that's true of like all the characters. I think, I've read tarot professionally for like 8 years now, I think. And one of the things that always strikes me about reading for people is that you get to see like the paradoxes of being human and how human beings contradict themselves all the time. Like, we want something, but when it's presented to us, we kind of like run from it. Um, I and I kind of saw this over and over, and I was thinking about that a lot when I wrote these characters, um, because I tried to build characters that have uh, a natural forms of antagonism between them and also internally. And what I mean by that is like when you have tension naturally in the story, it really like propels things forward much faster. And things like Cece is really good at expressing herself and how she feels and all of her emotions. Um, and Rainer has a really hard time with it. And they're best friends and they've known each other for a really long time. And they have kind of these ruts that they're in their relationship. And they also have kind of this natural tension between them because this thing that is very easy for her is really difficult for him. And even though he doesn't actively resent that it's easy for her, we can kind of see him struggle with a thing at the same time that it's coming very naturally to her. And we see her on the other side of things really struggle to like compose herself and be like stoic in moments when it comes really easily to him. And those kind of relationships, I think, really build a natural tension, so you don't have to keep throwing obstacles at them for us to see that there's kind of this push pull between them. Um, and and also, if you think about like how Rainer is as a character and how Xander is as a character, Xander has he's very charming. He is very free to say whatever he thinks and feels, and has no problem being very flirtatious. Rainer is not allowed to be flirtatious, and like he has to be a very specific way around Cece. Like he's the no person, so he has to tell her no to all of her reckless bad ideas, of which there are a lot. And Xander gets to be like the fun guy, and so there's sort of this natural tension between them also, in that Rainer is the one that has to say no and Xander is the one that gets to say yes. And and I think about that whenever I build, because I think like characters that feel real come from relationships that feel real and like tiny details about them that feel real. So the rhyme that Cece says to Rainer is exactly the kind of thing that I think makes a character feel really human, where she says, I see a worry, but I'll fix it in a hurry. They've known each other since they were children. And like, of course she would find some like little rhyme to say to annoy him when they were kids. And things like, I know, Harley, you did the art of Rainer's anxiety,
Yeah.
which is like another thing that is like kind of brings it feels like the characters have known each other for a long time and like they had a whole life before the story started, and like they'll continue to live afterwards. And I think like a lot of that comes from that natural tension and building those relationships as if they've existed all of this time before the story started.
That's actually, I think I've told you this before, Sheila, but that is one of my favorite pieces of the world building. And I think we get that piece in The Memory Curse, which is book 2
Yeah.
of this tea blend that Cece has sitting in her home that's been made specifically for Rainer because he's anxious, and this tea blend calms him down, right? That's like
Hmm.
such a beautiful piece of the world because it's so intimate to know that about somebody else, to know that that's what calms them down, and to have that in your home.
Yeah. Yeah. And I really wanted to write a story that felt really character driven um, and very much like these are real people who are going through a complicated situation, and they're not unaffected. Like they're all affected in their own ways and they have their own ways of dealing with it. Um, but ultimately, I really wanted it to feel like it was a little bit more of an ensemble piece. I think of the series now as sort of like book 1 and 2 is really like largely I'm trying not to spoil anything. Book 1 and 2 is largely like Cece's arc, and she's very like central to the whole storyline. But from there, it sort of branches out a little bit more, and the story grows the same way a world grows across the course of like a fantasy novel. Like the story grows, and we care about more characters, and there's new people being introduced. And I think that kind of slowly building that stuff in was also a thing that I wanted to do. I didn't want to like throw everything at readers up front because I also have ADHD, and I have a really hard time if I just have a really hard time if I get like a ton of information at once. I can't really focus and I can't retain it. So my style of world building, I think, is also a little bit different too, in that I try to really um, build it in a way that feels seamless. So sometimes people are like, "Oh, the world building is really simple," and I'm like, "Well, it took 15 drafts to get it to seem really simple, so it's not that simple." But I'm glad that it feels that way.
Such a good point because I I never felt like I was consciously building the world. Like only Argaria, like they just kind of ended up forming an image in my head through everything that you did. Like you said, it was like so seamlessly done. I feel like I was building up the characters and like who they were as people and like they're fully formed people in my brain. Like there are some books that I read and I'm like, yeah, I love these characters, but they're clearly book characters. Whereas the characters in your book, I'm like, no, these are my friends. These are people I know intimately. Like it's so weird. Like sometimes like I'm talking to people in real life and I'm like, yeah, like this person I know, Cece, and I'm like, no, that's not a person I know. It's a book I read.
But
And
I
I want to
did, and
reference them like I know them.
I really wanted it to feel that way, like to feel like these are people that you know, because I feel, I read all of these books, and when I was looking back, the ones that stood out the most were the ones with characters that felt really fully formed. And so I wanted to write something that had characters that felt that way, that felt like they would stay with me afterwards.
I do. And listening to you talk about them was starting to make me emotional. Like I started to like tear up thinking
Yeah.
about everything I know about what these characters have been through in the last 4 books.
Mm. I not a single day goes by that I don't very specifically think about Xander.
That makes me so happy, though.
Like we'll get into it a little bit more in the spoiler questions. I don't think it's on our list, but we'll get into it a little bit more then because it is a very big spoiler. But
Yeah.
it is so cool to know that like you're like, oh yeah, I wanted these to feel like big, fleshed out, real people. Will you have people like me, like Jenny, I know has said it, like Drew has said it, these are like real people. They feel very real. They feel whole. They feel like they're just our friends living far away.
Yeah.
And you did like such a great job of building is no, it's not a spoiler that there's a love triangle element, right?
No, it's not.
I feel
Okay,
I was
okay.
like,
It's
I
in
feel like
all
that's
of it's in
marketed.
all
Yeah,
of
I
my
know about
marketing. Yeah.
that. So
Yeah.
Okay, I was gonna say, I feel like it's been marketed like that. Okay, so you did do like a wonderful job of creating this love triangle. Cause I normally really don't like a love triangle, just it feels unbalanced, like you can tell. I don't know, just it's not my cup of tea normally. But you did it in such a amazing way. And I was honestly genuinely unsure who the the female main character was gonna end up with, and at one point, I was like, "You know what? Just give me who it's supposed to be, like, I will accept anything at this point." So, did you always know who the main, like, endgame couples were going to be, or, like, did it change as you were drafting the series?
Um, I knew I knew who Cece was going to end up with. I didn't necessarily know for everyone else until I was probably like, I'm trying not to spoil anything. The other characters that kind of came as I was going. Um, like the same way that most of the story builds, like I like driving down a dark road and I'm like I drive a little bit and I can only see like what the headlights are hitting, you know, I can't see anywhere beyond that. So I kind of like got to a point and it would come like the idea would just come into my head and I'd be like, oh yeah, that's how this is supposed to be. Or I would write a scene and I'd be like, oh, that's weird, these characters have more chemistry than I was expecting them to have, you know. Yeah, so I kind of knew from the beginning with the love triangle who she was going to end up with. And I, the thing about, I did a lot of research about love triangles because I love them, but I very rarely feel like they're done well. And I think that the trope in general gets a bad rap because a lot of people are used to it but just being kind of like a plot device um, to like add tension to an already sort of settled relationship. Um, and I didn't want it
You
to
can
feel like
just
that.
say, I was gonna say, Sheila, you can just say people are used to it being like Twilight.
They are. I mean, here's the thing. When I looked up great love triangles in literature, um, the two examples that came up were Twilight and Jane Eyre, which Jane Eyre made me laugh out loud. If you've read Jane Eyre, you know why it's funny. If you have not, send me a DM and I'll tell you. Um, I and I was like, I can do better than this. Like I can do better than what we have here. But I think the thing that I didn't realize was going to be so difficult about it is that you have to commit in order to do that, in order for it to feel that way to the reader, you have to commit equally to both love stories, which means that you have to break your own heart as the writer because you know that one of them isn't going to work out and you have to make it just as beautiful and compelling as the other. Um, so that when the character chooses, it feels like she has the agency to choose the person that she really wants to be with. And it's not being made by some outside source or by some lack of chemistry or anything like that. It's being made by like an active choice, which is one of the central themes for Cece through the books, is that she really values choice. And that is from the very like first chapter, I think, like you pretty much know that that is very important to her. And so adding a love triangle to the story also kind of brings that to the forefront. Um, and I, writing a love triangle, I maybe someday I will do it again. It was really difficult. It's really hard to keep the tension right the whole time and to not have it feel like somebody is being dishonest or like just not showing up authentically in their relationship. Um, and I also think like there needs to be a compelling reason that you believe that the character would end up with either of the options. And you need to allow the tension of competition to exist in the story, which can feel like a little difficult to do sometimes when you're like, oh, I don't want them to make mistakes. Like, I don't want them to be flawed and like get their feelings hurt, but you have to let it happen. And also, like, the reader needs to believe that there is like a believable happily ever after possible for the character with either of the options. And like doing all of those things while also writing like a fantasy plot and trying to do so many, like there's so many moving parts. That was like a very difficult thing to do, but I'm super proud of how the love triangle turned out. And there are a lot of people, Drew, who say I don't like love triangles, but I like this one. And I think it's because there's not a clear winner. They're just different choices. It's not like this is the good guy and this is the bad guy. They're both good guys. They're just very different.
I like Drew, I'm not like a love triangle person, but I love both of them for such different reasons.
Yeah.
They're so different and it is so believable. You're like, "Oh my gosh, who is she gonna choose?" Personally, if you're like me, you don't think she has to, but
I was gonna say, let's not forget the why choose option.
Of course. Of course. I know.
we
I
will
knew it
never
was going to
ever let
come up
Sheila
at
forget.
some point.
Although it was a beautifully written book, Sheila, I guess I guess it's okay that it wasn't a wide choose. No, I'm just kidding. I'm totally kidding.
It's not okay. We are holding a grudge against you about it.
Oh, on your Patreon, you could write us a special why choose scene.
Very true. Very true.
The way we're just, like, hyping your non-existent Patreon right now, like, people are gonna be like, What's it? What's the link to
Where's
Sheila's
the
Patreon?"
Patreon? Yeah, where is
Okay,
it?
Yeah, where's the Patreon?
no, listen, we did this to Vanessa too, and Sheila, I don't know if you saw on her server the day that her episode dropped, like 4 people were like, "Yeah, Vanessa, make a Patreon." A whole bunch, and then they were like, "I'd listen, I'd subscribe right away." And I was like, "Yes, the
Oh my
pressure."
god.
Oh, perfect, perfect, perfect. We can peer no, but Sheila, the one of the wonderful things about Sheila, I like you are definitely the adult among us, and you definitely don't give in to peer pressure. Like, I feel like we can pressure some other people to drop some little nibbles for us, but you don't give us crumbs unless you are already planning to give us crumbs.
That's very true. I am above the influence. I am the influence. I just
It's been
I've
it's been a
I've
long
always
time
been
since
that
I heard
way.
above the influence.
Listen, my mother, I'm the oldest of 4 kids, and my mother, when my brother went to school, he's 2 years younger than me. When he went to college, she was like so anxious, and I was like, what is your deal right now?" And she was like, "Well, I always felt like you were going to be the one like influencing other people, so I wasn't worried about you like getting into trouble because you would just be like, 'No.'" She's like, "But I feel like your brother's like more impressionable." And I was like, "What?"
Aw.
So that's just
And
like how I've always been. It's like I wouldn't just do something for the sake of approval.
hey, Sheila, did your college make you sign like a sobriety pledge?
No, I went to state school.
Where did you
Okay.
go to college, Harley?
I went to also a state school that made the underage or requested kindly that the underage students sign the sobriety pledge. I did it. I got my free soda and then I went and I put vodka in it.
Nice. Nice. Yeah, that was not my vibe. Sobri- Sobriety was not my vibe in college because I was very like I had a very strict upbringing. Even when I went home from college, I had a curfew and everything. So I had fun when I was in school. I mean, I really in like looking back now, I'm like I really did not get into like any trouble at all, comparative to how most people do. Um, but but I
Where'd you
also
go to
was
school?
not like I went to Westchester, which is it's in the western Philadelphia suburbs.
Okay. Um, so mental health plays such an important role throughout this whole series. We see it in all the characters, different relatable mental health attributes such as anxiety, PTSD, and depression. Going in, did you know what you were writing was going to be therapeutic to readers? Was that something you did deliberately, or was it to like give exposure to that, or was it just what you wrote because that's some of the things that you were going through yourself?
Yeah, so I definitely wrote it like part of it kind of relates back to what I was saying earlier about like fantasy series. I feel like a lot of them, it's like the big battle ends and then it's just like, oh, happily ever after, like everything's fine. And the Storm King, especially the third book, is very much a what happens after you save the world book, um, where a lot of bad stuff has happened in the first 2 books. There's a lot of trauma, and it's basically everybody trying to um, recover from that. And I always knew that that was how that book was going to be. I didn't realize how intense it was going to be until I wrote it and edited it like 5 times um, because it was definitely the most challenging one to write. But I knew I wanted to include some mental health stuff because it's been something that I've dealt with since I was, I mean, a teenager. Like it's just been most of my life. It's been dealing with anxiety and depression and PTSD and all of these different things. And so I think like it's very hard to pull that out of me as an experience, like for it to not come out in my writing at least a little bit. Um, in fact, like there were certain things about writing Cece that one of my friends was like, "Oh, like Cece's somatic experience is like so interesting," and like part of like how I realized I have ADHD was like in writing these books, honestly. Um, but I kind of had this experience of I was processing a lot of anxiety at the time that I was writing it. So I think a lot of it was kind of coming into the story, just because I was ultimately writing these books for myself originally. And so a lot of it was in there, planned to be in there. But I definitely didn't quite anticipate um, other people relating to it so much because I also kind of come from a family that doesn't really like. I come from an Irish Catholic family and they don't really like believe in mental health as a thing. So I also was very much raised in this environment where that's like not really a thing we talk about. And so it was a different experience to write about it and then to have readers relate to it. And that was, writing it was healing. But I also think having people read it and talk about relating to it was much more healing than I expected it to be because I wasn't necessarily thinking about that when I was writing it because again I was just writing it for myself. Um, but I think that um, when I think of writing being therapeutic, I think of like poetry or memoir and stuff like that, and I don't necessarily think about fiction. But I think in writing fiction, you get a certain distance from reality that allows you to be really honest about things in a way that feels a little safer than being like this is my experience.
I know for me, the memory curse, like, specifically just brought up a lot of really deep rooted, like, childhood traumas. And it's stuff that, like, I have thought about, of course, but reading, I feel like being able to take yourself out of your experiences and read about another character going through similar things as you, just, like, even, like, a similar mental state is so healing, and it's so therapeutic, and you can really just kind of look at your own situation with, like, a bird's eye view because you relate to them, and then you can see how they dealt with it, and I
Yeah.
know, like, for me personally, I've been, like, going through some shit, like, personally in my life, and I felt, like, so lost when I started The Lost God. I felt very akin to Cece, and then going through this whole journey with her, I I also, like, I was like, "Okay, like, I feel like I'm healing, and I'm getting to this point where by the end of The Godless Kingdom, like, I had set up certain things to, like, I'm moving, like, I'm going through these things in my life where I feel, like, content, and it felt like a full circle moment to go through it with your characters.
You're gonna make me cry.
Good, because 'cause you've made me cry so many times.
No, it's only
Yeah,
fair.
I was gonna say I had a similar feeling about reading The Storm King, particularly the beginning part, and I had like a very visceral, physical reaction to reading the first handful of chapters and to be inside a specific character's head when they're going through some of the things that they're going through. And I was like, "Oh no." But it was good. It was nice to be able to read about someone who is going through similar things that were in my head. Maybe not at this point in my life, but certainly past points in my life, and be
Yeah.
able to want to like give them a hug and be like, it'll get better. You just have to like put your head down, put in the work, and it'll get better. And just wish I could just give them a hug through the pages of the book.
Yeah, yeah. And I think like going back to how I think it kind of sets itself apart from some other romantasy books is that I really wanted it to feel like like despite all of these things that they have going on, like you can still be strong. You can struggle with these things and you can still be strong. You can go through all of these things and carry a lot of weight and learn how to share it with other people. And and to see different types of strength, because like I said, I felt like it was a lot of the same type of strength that was being reflected, which I aspire to, but again, is not something that I've necessarily felt or experienced. And ultimately, I really wanted the journey of the story for all of the characters to be not just about like romantic love, but also about like self love and really making peace with the things that you maybe don't like about yourself, and like learning to love those things through like the reflection of, you know, found family and really close friends and lovers and like all of these different people who really help you find yourself when you're feeling lost in those moments.
It really is a series like around just relationships as a whole. Like I know I've already told you like this series has given me the most beautiful love story I've ever read about, but it also just gives such beautiful relationships like with yourself. It shows like relationships with friends and how a romantic relationship can even blossom into something differently once it ends, which is so beautiful.
Yeah, makes me so happy.
So we've seen on Instagram that you have quite a few works in progress in the pipeline, and you mentioned kind of briefly today as well. You have a Red Riding Hood inspired book, a tarot series, a poison book, and a secret project. Are you allowed to give us a little sneak peek about any of these projects?
Oh, this is such a good question. Okay. I I am definitely able to talk about the Red Riding Hood one. I can't, I don't know if I can talk about the other ones. So the Red Riding Hood one is called Song of the Darkwood, and it is, I liken it to sort of a fractured Red Riding Hood retelling meets Hades and Persephone. And it is about a woman with a spirit enchanting voice whose job is to lure spirits of the departed from the realm of the living across the dark wood to the god of death. And there, a lot of stuff happens toward the beginning of the book. This blight breaks out in the dark wood, and it's threatening the very remote village food supply the village that she lives in. And she needs to essentially seduce the wolf to try to figure out why he's created this blight and why it's affecting their food supply. And I'm very excited about it. Like I said, I wrote this book back in 2021 when I wrote all of the Lost God books. And I've been sitting on it all of that time, and I've been so excited about it. It is a standalone, and it is a little bit more like gothic, very spooky season. Um, and it brings in a lot of my heritage, both from like there's a lot of Irish mythology kind of mixed in, and the primary story takes a lot of inspiration. It's not set in Ireland, but it takes inspiration from the rise of Christianity in pagan Ireland. So kind of like a religious trauma aspect. And I'm very excited for people to read it. But it also has a lot of my like personal family history, which is my grandma came over from Ireland when she was 15, and you know, she is a very courageous person. She's done a lot of like very courageous things in her time. She's passed now, but I always really like looked up to her and her courage, and so like there was a lot of her in the story. And my other grandma is is like me in that she is like a little connected, um, a little bit of a medium herself, and so there is also kind of that aspect of spirits and seeing spirits and communicating with them in this book as well. So it's really kind of like the heritage of my two grandmothers kind of pulled into this story that truly would probably horrify them to read, because it is spicy and it is supernatural, and especially my one grandma is very Catholic, and like no Harry Potter type Catholic, you know, like that's witchcraft. So she would probably like not be the biggest fan of the book, but I like to think that she would still be very proud.
Oh my god, I'm so excited. It sounds perfect for spooky season. Are you allowed to tell us like a general time when it'll be out?
Oh yeah, it's coming September 20th. So I'm
Oh.
working on the cover right now with my cover designer. So Andrea, who has done the Memory Curse through the Godless Kingdom, is doing the cover. Um, and I've only seen the sketch and the color blocked version of it, but it's very cool. I'm so excited. And she's excited too because she was kind of locked into a template for the Lost God books, and this is the first time she's getting to explore. And this is very much her kind of book, also. So I'm very excited about that.
She did a beautiful job on on the Lost God books. The cover designs for those are beautiful, so I'm really excited to see what you guys make together in the future.
Yeah, I'm so thrilled. So I'm very excited for that book, and I think it's going to be good. It's a very different world. It's a little more contained because it is a standalone. But I'm very excited for people to get kind of a different vibe. In particular, people who um, read the Lost God series and really liked Grimm, my God of Death. This story is
Yes.
sort of like it's a very different character who plays the God of Death in this book. But it's sort of like I had such a good time writing Grimm that I ended up writing this book, and that was part of what what inspired it, honestly.
You know, that would just make his ego so big.
I know, he would love it. And I will say also that this story is it's dual point of view, and it's a little bit more like a traditional, like a little bit more of a traditional romance, like what you would expect from a traditional romance. There's still a very big fantasy plot kind of tangled around it. Um, but it's a little more traditional in that dual point of view where we have the two love interests.
I'm very, very excited.
So
Yes,
excited.
me
I
too.
can't wait.
I really can't wait. I'm so impatient, and I know that you guys know this about me, but like I'm so deeply impatient. And having been sitting on this book for like 3 years is killing me. So I'm very excited for it to be out.
And then for the other ones, you're staying tight-lipped about those last few little projects, Sheila?
Yeah, so so mostly because I don't really know. I might have done something the other day that messed up my I might have done something that messed up my timing. I'm a super planner. I'm not a plotter for my books, but I am a planner for my projects. And I might have done something that messed up all of my scheduling for like the next year and a half. So I'm not quite sure. Um, I'm not quite sure when those projects are going to happen, but I do have a poison book, which is about 50% written right now, and I'm hoping to finish by the end of the year, at least the draft aspect of it. That is probably it's probably the most complicated book I've written. I do think it's a standalone, but it's probably a long one. Um, and it is it's another epic fantasy romance. Um, but it has a lot of moving parts and a lot of twists. And I am kind of in the point now where I'm around like 50-ish% through writing it. And I'm like, did I bite off more than I can chew? Which is usually a good sign for me because if I'm not pushing myself, if I'm not like challenging myself with each new book, then I will probably get bored. So it's probably a good sign, but I'm I'm still a little bit intimidated by it. But I'm really excited for like the premise of the story, which again I can say nothing about, but I'm very excited about it. And then my tarot series is a little bit farther out. I've written the first book and a half, and that is side by side interconnected romances, and that is more like urban fantasy. It's contemporary, um, and uh, it follows a community, sort of like it almost has like small town romance vibes in that like these people have kind of all grown up together and have a lot of like infighting and a lot of history with each other. And they have these 22 different houses that are all based on the major arcana of the tarot. Their magic is based off of that. And so I'm very excited about it. It's the most fun I've ever had writing books because they're just completely unhinged. Like both of the first book especially, and then the second book I kind of like upped the level of unhinged, and I wrote them as something light and fun to write after I wrote the Lost God series, which is very emotional and heavy in a good way, but just like it was a lot, and I was like, I need to do something that's fun. So I'm very excited for those books too, but I'm not, again, not totally sure on the timing of them, so I don't want to say too much. I will say that the first book is a heist book, which I'm very proud of it.
These sound like so much fun. I can't wait.
They're so diverse too. I'm excited. I'm definitely excited. Okay, so as we're kind of wrapping up our spoiler-free section, Sheila, do you have any advice for aspiring authors?
Oh my gosh, yes. So I was thinking about this a lot beforehand. I was glad that you sent me the question ahead of time because I think about a lot like how to say something concise. I mean, reading is really important, and I think reading really heavily in whatever genre you want to write in so that you kind of internalize some of the larger parts of the story or some of the exciting parts of the story. Like when you're reading a book and you get to that part, like I was talking about at the beginning of the podcast where I was talking about An Ember in the Ashes, there are a couple parts when I was reading that first book that I was like, oh my God, I am so hooked right now. Like this is so good. And now that I'm a writer, I try to like kind of pull the book apart and say like, what is it about this that hooked me in right away? So I think bringing a little bit more awareness to your reading and saying like, oh, what was it about that moment that gave me that like gut punch? Or like, what was it about this story that I loved so much? I try to kind of break that down a little bit more. So that's kind of like the larger stuff. And I know a lot of writers say that. So the other thing that I will say is that there's not just one way to do it. A lot of advice that I see even now about writing is all based on people who plot everything out. And that is never really how it's worked for me. I've written 7.5 books now. And it has never really been that I know the entire plot from the drop. And I think what I see a lot with newer writers is that they get really stuck because they don't have everything figured out. And I think part of it is having a little bit of faith in yourself that you can, even if you can't figure it out on the first pass, that when you go back and read it, you will be able to figure it out. And also, for me, it's always about connecting to the emotional heart of the story. I think that's what keeps me writing, is understanding what the kind of primary emotional story that I want to tell is. Like with The Lost God, it was really that I wanted to tell this story about all of these different people who thought that they needed something outside of themselves to like prove themselves, kind of learn that they just kind of need to bring that love inward and accept themselves as the way that they are. Fortunately, they have to go through all kinds of shit to get there, but that was kind of the thing that kept me driving the story forward. And I think that having that emotional connection to either the type of story that you're trying to tell or the character growth that you're trying to show is what will keep you pushing through in the moments where you aren't as sure about what you're doing. And like all of those moments of doubt that come up, I always kind of come back to that emotional connection to whatever the story is. And that's been true across the board, not just with The Lost God. Like I have this thing where I can't really start on a project until I understand what that piece is. And then as soon as I get it, it's like I'm like shot out of a cannon. Like I can write pretty quickly once I have it. It's just a matter of understanding the characters and understanding what my kind of emotional connection to the story is. So I would say like a lot of that is like having a little bit of faith in yourself and your own creative intuition, and not necessarily feeling like you need to plot everything out ahead of time. Or like a thing that I do a lot is I will write to like the midpoint and then I will go back and reread everything that I wrote, and then usually I can figure out how to get to the end. Um, so just like allowing yourself to be a little bit more flexible when you're first starting out and treat it like an experiment where you're learning how your creative process works.
Sheila, I know you mentioned like you're not a plotter, which I'm also not. I feel like we might have talked about this in one of the servers before. Do you try to write in order, or do you typically like jump around like when one scene that has to happen even if you're not there yet? Do you like jump around and then piece it together later?
Yeah, if I'm stuck, I jump around. I'm sure there's people who are horrified hearing that. I jumped around a lot when I wrote The Lost God, which made editing a nightmare, truly. But I think that
Something for me to
sometimes
look forward to.
I think you just have to like understand it and give yourself some grace. Another thing that I learned, and this is like such like a silly tip, but Susan Denard, who is a great writer and has a great newsletter about writing, she puts the actual like timeline in her chapter headers, which is so smart because the hardest thing for me working backwards when I was jumping around was to understand where I was in the timeline. And that has helped me a lot as somebody who does jump around, because sometimes I just am stuck and I can't quite figure out how to get to the next scene that I know is going to happen. So I'll jump ahead. I usually don't jump super far ahead. I'll jump maybe a chapter or two and write the thing that I know is coming. And then I'll kind of go back. And usually by the time I finish that, I've figured out what needs to happen in between. And again, a lot of my book is made in revisions. I've just kind of accepted that that's how it is. There are other people who write, like Vanessa is actually a person who writes really clean first drafts. I mean, but it takes her longer to write the actual first draft because she's really like going through and thinking through everything as she goes. But there was no, and that's why like I say that there's no right way to do it. And I worry about people getting discouraged because they feel like they're doing it the wrong way, because I felt like that a lot in the beginning. And I've learned that this is just how my process works. And even now, like right now, I'm working on the spinoff, and I have done this 7 times now, and I still don't trust that the story is going to come to me as I go. Like I'm like, I need to have it all figured out, but like that really is not a thing that happens for me. And so I need to just accept that sometimes I need to skip around a little bit, and that'll get everything moving, and then I can go back and fix it.
Yeah, I've definitely like learned that about my process is like I will not be able to like sit down and figure everything out, like come up with the detailed plot. My draft feels like it's just a rough outline with some fleshed out scenes in there right now. Like I have the beginning, and then I have like recently skipped ahead to something that happens like right after the climax of the story. And then I have a few scenes scattered throughout like towards the end of the book and then the last chapter.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I feel like I have more substantial stuff for the ending than I do the beginning.
Beginnings are so hard too, though. I think like sometimes I need to write the end to understand how to structure the beginning better. And beginnings are almost always the thing that I end up rewriting the most, because it's hard to know the exact right starting point, because sometimes if you start too late in the story, meaning like if you start and you haven't explained enough, then you keep having to like pause the action to explain what's happening. But if you start too early, then it's like dragging and you're like, oh my gosh, when am I going to get to the thing that I'm like dying for everybody to read, you know? So I think like a lot of revising is figuring out like where that end point is and then what the right starting point is based on that. So that's not weird to me at all that's how you feel.
Yeah, I like it. Probably will change at some point in like editing, but I like the first chapter. It's just like the chapters after that have
Yep.
I've felt like stuck on, all right, how do I get to that big plot point at the climax? Like, what do I need to do there? And to get there, and like figuring out all the subplots that tie everything together as well.
Yeah. And that's one of the things that I think comes up too when you're doing revisions is I can see much easier when I'm going back and going through an edit. I can see the lulls in the story a little bit easier, and usually that is a place where I'll insert some part of a subplot so that it never really feels like there's nothing happening. There's always something happening. But it's a little bit easier to see where to weave in those subplot storylines when you have something to work from, for me at least. And I think a lot of people are like that and think that they should be able to plot. And I think it's hard to hold that much in your brain at once, especially in fantasy. Like,
Yeah.
when you're writing a magic system and you're writing characters and you're trying to give rules to the magic system and the world and all of these different things, it's really hard to hold all of that in your head and write the story at the same time. And so for me, it's a lot of layers of editing. So usually my first drafts have gotten a little bit more complete just because I've done it a lot now. But usually it's going back through and looking at the pacing of those different things, like you said, the A plot, and then usually the romance plot, and all of the subplots that kind of weave into it, and seeing where I feel like things are a little too slow, and then cleaning those up. And then it's things like, because I write multi POV, then I will go through and literally I'll read like all of the Cece chapters back to back. I'll read all of the Rainer chapters back to back, even out of order, just so I can make sure the voice sounds consistent among them. Like, there are certain things when we're in Xander's POV, he only ever calls her Cece out loud and when he's thinking about her. But Evan, for example, will call her Cecilia in his head and call her Cece if he's talking to Xander or Sylvie. But the rest of the time, she's Cecilia. And so, like, there's like little things like that. There's certain characters who speak a little more proper and stuff like that. So there's like a lot of layers of editing and going back through and making sure I didn't use magic at a time when I shouldn't and stuff like that. So I think I think of it as each edit that I go through, I'm kind of layering in a different type of writing, and that helps me not get overwhelmed, because the other thing that happens is if you start at the very beginning and just try to do everything in every single chapter, it will get really daunting and exhausting really fast. And you'll be like in like the 5th chapter ready to like lay down and take like a month-long vacation, you know?
You know what I just realized? I know we're going to transition. We've got a couple of spoiler-free listener questions that Keeps in Discord asked us to ask, but
Yeah.
we didn't ask you. We usually do this at the beginning of our guest episodes. Where can people find you on social media?
Oh, yeah. You can find me on Instagram at Sheila Reads and Writes, and people misspell my name a lot. It's Sheila. So Sheila Reads and Writes, and you can find my website at SheilaMasterson.com, and it was just redone. It's really beautiful. Very proud of it, even though I had almost nothing to do with it.
It is beautiful.
It looks really good. My friend Patty, who I have been friends with for a really long time, and I refer to as my tech witch, she is so talented, and she did such a great job building it. And it is also should be, again, very accessible, because accessibility is very important to me. So it should be accessible in different languages and for non-auditory people. So I'm very excited about it.
Okay, so Jackie wanted you, Sheila, to do fuck, marry, kill with your main 3.
Oh my gosh. Oh, that's so hard. Okay, hold on. Let me think about this for a second. I feel like knowing myself. Oh, this is so bad. I can't kill Cece.
You
But I feel
could.
like I have to because if I was married to Cece, that would just like not be a good relationship. We're too that's too many babies in one relationship. You know what I mean? Like we're both baby, and so I don't think that would work. Uh, so I think I would have to marry Rainer, fuck Xander, and kill Cece. Oh my god, I'm such a bad writer. That's so bad.
You have to pick
That was a
somebody.
mean question, Jackie.
If it makes you feel
Why
better.
choose Jackie?
Oh.
If it makes you feel any better, Sheila, I think I would have to pick the same
Yeah.
because
I
I
I think
can't.
you have to know yourself, and I just think I need somebody who's a little more chill than like I would need to be married to somebody who's a little more chill than Xander and Cece both because they're both just wild.
Super fair. I would why choose them. I just no, I can't. I'm thinking about it. I literally yeah, no, I'd have a four-way with them for sure. Is that an answer?
That's Drew, that's not the game.
Did I get distracted?
Am
Am I in the library?
I the am I the problem?
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Do you want to ask the next one, Harley?
Yeah. So this also comes from Jackie. And she wanted to know if any of your future she wanted to know if any of your future works will feature an animal sidekick.
Yes. So the poison book oh gosh. The poison book has a wolf in it. Um and the second tarot book has a cat in it that is very relevant to the plot. And it's going to be a lot of fun. Her name is Pandora. And I'm very excited
Ooh.
about that entire plot point. So that is probably the one that she's looking for.
Okay. Very good. Drew,
And
you want to
then,
ask our last one?
sure. Do you know who asked this one?
Oh, we actually kind of covered this in our first question, but it was Tori.
Okay. Yeah, if there's anything more you'd like to say, Tori asked, did you have all of your main plot points you wanted to hit all planned out, or did you wing it? But I feel like you covered most of that.
Yeah. And she was
Yeah, yeah.
specifically asking in regard to the Lost God.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, no. I mean, I always have, I think, kind of the broadest points of the story. I usually say that I need to know the least I need to know is where the book I'm writing ends, because I need to know what I'm writing toward in order to get the tone right. So yeah.
Cool.
Perfect. Okay. Um,
Nancy, we're
yeah.
sorry.
Sorry, Nancy. Bye.
Nancy, they
All
are
right.
so ice cold.
I know,
Listen,
but
hopefully one day soon we will have a spoiler episode where you can stay, hang out with us.
I mean, at the very least, when we've got Tay on, I'll
Exactly.
be
There we
there
go.
for that. But yeah, I'll
Wait,
hop off. I'm gonna go read for a bit before I go to sleep.
Enjoy.
This was fun. I'll talk to y'all later.
Hi,
Bye.
Nancy.
Bye.
Bye. Okay, and listeners, we are now hopping into the spoiler section. So if you haven't read The Lost God, The Memory Curse, and The Storm King, there's going to be spoilers for those. And if specifically we wind up talking about spoilers for The Godless Kingdom, we will also note that before we say them. so that way no one's getting accidentally spoiled.
Okay, good.
Do we want to start with the listener questions, or do we want to start with the other ones?
Let's start with listener questions.
Okay, perfect. So the first one we have is, I believe this one came from Jenny, and it's, who's a character that you thought about killing off but didn't?
Okay, and we're talking about the first 3 books, right?
Yeah.
Oh gosh, let's see. I definitely thought about killing I thought about killing Evan off, and Cal, at different points. I'm always and Sylvie. I'm always looking for, if I kill a character, it is usually because it serves the story in some way and not just like for the sake of having like shock value. So there is a death in book 1, which I guess I can talk about because it's the spoiler section. But when Teddy died, I knew, like, I don't know specific plot points, but I knew that he was really important to the relationship between Evan and Xander, and I knew how things were going to end up for Xander in terms of like his family, and I knew that he was going to be king. And so I knew that that relationship was going to be important, and not having Teddy as sort of like the peacekeeper between the two of them was going to complicate things for both of them and force them. Like, Teddy was doing a lot of emotional labor in that friendship trio. And so it was really going to force the two of them to grow up a lot, and to advocate better for themselves instead of waiting for Teddy to do it for them. And even in their relationship with each other, you know, in a lot of ways, Evan and Xander's relationship mimics Rainer and Cece's, in that Evan has always been in that protector role, and he is the more responsible one, trying to protect somebody who is reckless. And the thing that I always say about like both of those dynamics is, would Xander always be as reckless if he didn't have Evan watching his back? Would Cece be as reckless if she didn't always have Rainer protecting her? Like, I don't know. And they both grew up in that environment. So those dynamics have existed for a long time. And I think there is, again, like we talked about tension earlier, I think there is like a natural tension / resentment in that, which is like, I don't know that either of those characters necessarily wanted to always be in a place of having to be the responsible one, but they were kind of forced into it. And so I always knew that like Teddy's death was going to have a lot of implications in their relationship and how they grew through the story. And I knew that Reese was going to be in the story later, Teddy's brother. And so I also needed to have a compelling reason why he might have a bone to pick, so that I could cast some suspicion on him in the Storm King. And that was part of what I was thinking about too. So like I said, I don't always know all of the plot points, but my brain is weird and it will connect certain things. And I'm like, I think I'm going to need this later. So yeah.
I loved the implications that Teddy's death had specifically on Cece's growth, because she felt real responsible for that. And you'll have to tell me, I think this is in the Storm King, but it might be in the Godless Kingdom, but she spends time with Reese in the Storm King, right? They meet at the
Yep, she does.
graveyard in the
Yeah.
Storm King. Okay. That scene is probably one of my favorite scenes from the book, where they just get like a moment where she's like, he was my friend and I'm really sorry that he died.
Yeah, yeah. And he was also, yeah, and he definitely did have a big effect on her too, because he was very natural with her when she was in like a really terrible situation. And she was separated from Rainer for the first time ever, and he was kind of like a steady, soothing presence, at a time when she had basically had the entire like foundation of her life ripped out from under her. So I think that she maybe like trauma bonded with him very quickly, and was really rocked by that entire situation. And all of them felt, I think, in the moment when he died, all of them felt responsible in some way.
Mm-hmm.
Like Evan had checked the woods. Xander let his guard down to check on Cece. Cece used too much of her magic too fast and was like exhausted. And I think like they all felt very responsible for his death. And I think like that was the thing that really stayed with her too, because you know, the whole way back, they're talking about all the things that he's going to see and all the things that he's going to do. And then that happens. And it just, like, it feels like they should be safe at that point, and they're not.
Feel at the moment they're talking about all the things they're going to see and all the things they're going to do, I'm like, oh, fuck, somebody's going to die.
Mm-hmm.
Tearing up right now. I'm just remembering. And like when she puts the lemon on his gravestone.
Yeah.
Oh my god.
Yeah.
You've broken me as a
And
person.
I was like,
again,
do you need a minute?
No, literally, like
I wanted
I
like
was just
that
listening
really
to you guys.
soft
I was just
character.
tearing up.
Yeah.
And
And
he's what?
I want, he's young, and he's very like, he is a lot, I think, like Cece, and that he's very empathetic and very reads people really well. And so we kind of see that in his relationship with Cece, less so with the guys, but a lot in memory in the later books. And especially when we get into Evan's POV in The Storm King, I think you get to see those gaps more, because Xander can be he's very single-minded, and Evan is more strategic and thinks more broadly. And he also is so, so analytical in every moment that he can see, like, even if he doesn't know how to fix it, he can see all the gaps that Teddy has left in their relationship. And he like almost like knows the moment that Teddy would be the one saying something. So when we get in his head, we see him feeling incompetent because he doesn't know how to like do what Teddy did in their relationship. And I think there's a hold on. I'm like, when does this happen? Never mind. That's the end of the Godless Kingdom. It's not really a spoiler. It's just a thing that Xander says later, that he says in the Godless Kingdom, which is like, the mark of a true friend is like that you never stop feeling their absence. And I think like,
Oh, yeah.
Xander's very in his own world at the beginning of the Godless Kingdom, but all Evan is thinking about is like, if Teddy was here, he could fix this, and I have no idea how to fix it. Like, and Evan, who is good at almost everything he does, except this one thing that he really needs to be able to do to save his friend. So yeah.
And the only other person who could even have maybe some type of role that would be similar is the reason why Xander's not doing great. Like,
Yes.
Cece has a lot of the same qualities that Teddy had, and then, but she can't fix it. Like, he's heartbroken over her. She can't fix that.
Yep, exactly.
Okay. I know you're not going to tell us. Maybe you will. Maybe we'll get lucky. I don't know. This doesn't come
Oh, maybe
out.
we'll get lucky.
Yeah, maybe. This doesn't come out until June 7th, so maybe you'll tell us. What does ALOS stand for?
I can't tell you. I will
You said you
probably. I can't. I will probably tell. Well, I will definitely tell the ARC team at our pajama party. But what can I say? I don't want you guys to find out before then. Okay, this is what I will say. The title of the spinoff is in the Godless Kingdom. But if you figure it
Write that
out,
down, write that down.
but if you figure it out, don't put it in my Discord. You can send me a message privately. But don't put it in the Discord and don't put it out widely, but it is in there, and
Okay.
you can probably figure it out.
Beautiful.
Thank you,
Me and
Sheila.
Drew are about to go on a treasure
I
hunt
know.
later.
No, the way I'm gonna start rereading the Godless Kingdom right now. The last time you gave us a challenge, that's what started my reread, so don't think I won't do it.
I
I know. You
won.
were so on top of it.
You were.
And
I
all my theories were wrong.
well, I won on another street team the title guessing competition because she's like, "Oh yeah, no, the title of my next book is said in this book." And I was like, "Okay, well, I think we have the initials. It's 4 words." And I went through and I like started scanning and I was like, "Oh my God, I think I know what it is." So I did like a search in my ebook and I found it and I like messaged her. I'm like, "Is this what it is?" And she goes, "Oh my God, you got it." And I was like, she goes, "Now I have to take my giveaway down."
I'm
Sorry.
very excited about it. I love the name, so I'm like very excited. And I like snuck it in there, and I was like, no one's gonna know except me. And
Well, now we know.
Nicole knows also because she knows everything and she likes to harass everybody.
Of course.
As she should. Chaos Queen.
So, Leah asked, which character would you want as a partner on The Amazing Race?
Oh my gosh. Oh, this is so good. Okay, so this is tough. I think I would want, it's really a toss up because you can make a case for a couple different people. I feel like Rainer would be really prepared and he would have like good snacks and stuff, which is very important to me as a traveler. As a traveler who
Jenny's
prefers to
gonna love
be
that.
just saying, like, I need somebody who's gonna be like very prepared and like ready to go. But I also feel like Evan is somebody who's very well connected. However, I think I have to go with Kato because
Oh.
he can literally jump from place to place really quickly. And I feel like we would just like crush it.
You're right. You know who's gonna be so excited that that was your answer?
I know, I know.
She's gonna love
I
that.
I know, but just like for practicality's sake, it's just like, I mean, we can literally just, as soon as first of all, I feel like he's going to be good at like figuring out puzzles and stuff. And like, he's good at manipulating people. So, like, if for some reason we need somebody to give us something, he will be able to do it. And then also, like, assuming we can use magic, of course. If we can't use magic, then it's probably a toss up between any of the three of them. That was such a fun question, though.
That is a fun question. If we can't use magic, I'm probably picking Evan. If we can use magic, I'm probably also picking Kato, if I'm being perfectly honest.
Yeah, I think it just makes sense, you know? And again, I love Cece so much, but like she's not the most responsible, and I feel like I would end up having to be like the grown up.
I don't want to be the grown up on The Amazing Race.
Yeah, exactly. I'm along for the ride and the riddles.
Tori asked, which character do you relate to the most?
I probably relate to Cece the most. I definitely have stuff in common with all of them, and I think that often people think that like when you write a female main character that must be the character who's like you. And like there are a couple like self-insert things about Cece, like the fact that she hates to get up early and loves sweets, and there's those things. But I definitely think that in terms of how she expresses herself and meets the world, I think I have a lot in common with her. But there's stuff about all of the characters that I think I relate to in different ways, but probably Cece.
Hello, listeners. If you haven't read The Godless Kingdom yet, be good girls and good boys and skip the next 7 minutes.
Drew, I need to know if you decided I was asking this next question, because you know how I feel about the pregnancy trope.
You know what? No, but maybe subconsciously I did.
And just to clarify, in case someone has not listened, if someone desperately wants a baby and they get pregnant, that is great. I need to go.
This is a godless
I need to.
kingdom thing, right?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
We're gonna back up. Um, these a couple of these questions do have spoilers for the Godless Kingdom. This first one does. So if you haven't read the Godless Kingdom, I know it's been out for like 4 days, but if you have not read the Godless Kingdom, maybe skip this question. Um, so did you always plan for Cece to get pregnant by the end of the series?
I did. I knew from basically like the very beginning. It was one of the few things that I knew at the beginning of book one.
I was trying to figure out how you would be able to make it work because I think the fact that she is unable to have children and she has not just one but several partners to whom that is incredibly important. Um I just it just seemed like that was the logical way to go, but I wasn't sure how you're going to make it work.
Yeah, so I kind of knew because I wrote it into kind of like the primary magic that like consent needs to happen in all of those caves in order for her to give to like she gives something, she chooses to give something, she gets something back. But that was the one cave where she didn't really have a choice and she knew that going in too, which should have in my mind raised some red flags for her, but I think it's like anything else when you're raised with something and you hear it over and over, it kind of becomes sort of ingrained. And she, again, in the moment, thought it was going to be something else, and was not even, that was not even really on her radar in terms of things that she was thinking about. She was trying to figure out how to avoid getting married at the time. Um, so she certainly wasn't thinking about having kids. And I think that's also realistic to like when you're 22, you're not like, and that's not true across the board, I know, but like you're still feeling, I think, like a kid yourself in a lot of ways. And so it feels like you have plenty of time, so to speak. Um, so I pretty much knew from the very beginning, and that's part of why I wrote consent in such a strong way, and kept bringing it up through the whole series. But again, um, in relation to other things, so nobody would be looking right at it. um, Although I was like, I feel like this is going to be super obvious because I thought I was going to get called out on it from like book one, that people were going to be like, wait, but she didn't consent to that. But nobody said anything.
It's so interesting that you made the whole thing about consent because I know you've talked about in both in the books and then also, in conversations you and I have had and conversations you've had with other people publicly and on Discord, you've talked so much about how consent is so important. And specifically, I think it was in regard to the library scene in The Storm King.
Mm-hmm.
You were
Yeah,
talking about how to configure that so that like everybody was a consenting participant.
exactly. Yeah. And I do think about it in like all different scenarios. And part of like when I think about magic in general, and especially how it shows up in this book, it is sort of this um, symbiotic relationship between witches and nature. And a huge part of that is about consent. Like they aren't they aren't use they aren't using something and like burning it out. They're kind of like channeling something through themselves, and they can only do so much. Like so there's sort of like this relationship that is a give and take that's in the entire story and really requires a sense of like intentionality, because even if I think about like modern witchcraft is so much about intention and consent and being specific and using specific wording, and um one of the primary elements of a spell is putting your intention into a specific um idea and then putting action behind that. And so I was really thinking about sort of like modern witchcraft and everything when I was writing this. And a huge part of that is, giving consent and being an active participant with agency in what you're doing.
For me, when I was reading The Lost God, I think I convinced myself that her entering the cave with the intention of, like, knowing she'd have to give something up was her consent, I guess? Like, that's what I convinced myself when I was like, "Okay, well, yeah, I guess that fits all the rules we've been given already, right?"
Yeah.
That was also how I felt, and then looking back, I'm like, "Oh my god, it's so obvious it was right there, right in front of us the whole
Well,
time."
that's when there were so many things through the whole series that I was like, this is too obvious. Somebody is definitely going to catch it. And very few people, like nobody so far has caught that. Which like I said, I felt like I made it so obvious in the first book. I thought somebody was going to be like, hey, wait.
I think you did a good job too of, like, breadcrumbing, because I know there were a couple times in scenes where it's like something felt off, like, it's like Cece had, like, a thought where it was like, "Something's just, like, not right about the deal I made," but then, like, something else happens, like, something bigger happens, and then, like, I also, like, have, like, an ADHD brain where it's like, "Okay, I've been distracted from thinking about this problem, like, there's a bigger problem to deal with," so you hit it well,
Yeah.
at least,
And
yeah.
whenever I'm trying to write something like that, where I'm like, this has to be in there. If I don't leave it in there somewhere, then like it's being disingenuous. I'm like making something up and it's like, well, that's convenient. But in those moments where that comes up, I really have to think about things like point of view. So a good example is in The Storm King. The first time we meet William is in Evan's point of view. And the first thing William does is flirt with Sylvie. And so immediately, Evan doesn't like William. And you have a justifiable reason why he doesn't like and trust William then for the rest of the book, because that's the first thing you see. It's reinforced several times. And we don't see William through anybody else's point of view. I think like much later in the book, we see a second of him in Xander's point of view, but Xander is distracted by something else and he isn't really paying close attention. And then it's not until the very end when we hear Cece talking about him that we realize who he is. And then it feels very obvious again. But because almost every time we see him through the book, and there is that one interaction with Raynor too. But since the entire book, he is basically mostly seen through Evan's point of view, and we know that Evan doesn't like him and has this bias against him. Same as Claire, like Cece doesn't like her because she's pretty and Xander is paying attention to her. And so you kind of have that moment at the beginning where, I think people are more likely to be suspicious, where Cece is suspicious, but not necessarily in the same way that she is suspicious, and also you're like, is she suspicious or are you jealous,
Mhm.
and same with Evan.
Speaking of our big bad guys here, I Leah has made me think a lot about Cato, and so she inspired this next question. But why did you choose to give Cato so much humanity towards the end? So by the Storm King, we know that he becomes mortal, but I feel like he was perfectly set up to just be the bad guy, in my mind at least. But you gave him like his own sort of redemption arc, so um and it gave a lot of depth to the story. So why did you decide to make that choice?
Yeah, so I mean, I always knew that he wasn't going to go down easily, that's for sure. um and he is definitely a man with a plan. So I knew he was going to have some sort of trick in his back pocket, as he often does. And I basically thought about what it would feel like to have spent like literally centuries just kind of like fucking with people because you didn't have anything better to do, and then to one day be like, ta-da, you've got a normal human lifespan now, and how that would affect you. And I think that he kind of, in some ways, like, Cato has his own code, so to speak, which is he's not just like a villain who's like bad for the sake of being bad. Like, he wants power and he saw a way to claim it and just like went after it. And that was like what he did for years. And I also think until the end of The Lost God, he's living under the thumb of his father, which we find out in the memory curse that Andros basically killed anyone that Cato got close to like teach him not to have weaknesses, essentially, because that's how all of the other gods died. So like in some ways that was like how the god of war loved someone, you know? But it definitely, I think, affected how he sees relationships. But what he does respect is a worthy adversary. And I think especially when Cece gets the drop on him in the memory curse, like twice. I mean, she kind of like, well, Xander gets him and then Cece gets him. And so I think that he has a certain, not affection, but definitely respect for somebody who can challenge him after so long of just kind of not being challenged at all. And so a lot of what I think happened over the course of writing his arc is that he was kind of forced to contend with the fact that for him, the closest thing to affection that he had really experienced was like respect for someone. And he says something in The Godless Kingdom to the effect of like, I like basically that he likes playing a game where like you're equals, you're operating from like an equal-ish playing field. And like Vincent's methods are not that playing field. Like that is like a different thing. And that's not a type of violence that he is comfortable with, though he is comfortable with a lot of other violence, not that kind. And I really think like a lot of what Cato is searching for is not really power so much as like human power, like human connection. And he's like trying to mimic it by like forcing people to do what he wants. And it's not until he's human that he really sort of understands that he has to have something else, you know? And so I think like at the end of The Godless Kingdom, he kind of gets this new assignment, which is good for him because it is something that he knows how to do. And it's also sort of like paying penance a little bit for some of the wrongs that he has done.
I love that. Are you allowed to tell us this? Will Cato be at least in the background of the spin-off at all?
Mm. I think. Yes. Yeah, that's safe to say.
Okay.
Ooh,
Exciting.
yes. Okay, so how did you decide which characters' point of views to write in? Um, I think Drew said after her reread, it's pretty obvious why CC, Xander, and Raynor were chosen. To me, that's also pretty obvious. But what made you select Evan as the fourth point of view?
Yeah. So when I was trying to structure the Storm King, again, I was having one of my long conversations with Tanya, and I was telling her that the challenge of having characters separated, and for the first part of the Storm King, Xander is back in Argaria, and Cece and Raynor are in Olney, and you get both of their points of view. So Cece is grieving a lot, and Raynor is trying to keep it together, but back in Argaria, we have Xander, who is like fully in a deep, dark depression and trying to like, not really trying to do anything, to be honest. And I needed somebody to be moving that story along. And I I kind of cycled through, like Tanya and I talked about it, and I cycled through the options, and Evan just ended up being the best one. Um, so I was not planning on writing a series where I wrote three male POVs and one female POV. I thought it was going to be more like two female POVs and two male POVs, or more women than men, but that's just how the cookie crumbled. And I originally thought I would maybe write from one of the love interests POVs, because the Storm King is kind of set up to be like a bachelor type style book. And but then I realized that if I wrote from one of their point of views, it would sort of ruin the suspense of knowing who he ends up with. Um, and it would be hard to keep certain secrets if I had written from Jess's POV, or even Isla's, because Isla has to know what's going on. You know, like you're not protecting the queen if you don't know what she's up to. So it just was too difficult to do that. And again, same as like writing The Lost God, it was too difficult to do that and not ruin the suspense of that part of the story of not knowing who was good and who was bad, and who he was going to end up with. So kind of the logical choice then was either Sylvie or Evan. And I just knew that Xander's relationship with Evan was going to be so important in that story that it just made sense to have Evan's POV. And his is easily the most challenging POV to write. Like, it really took me a long time to get that voice, which partially was because I'd written two books with Cece's point of view and one with Rainer and Xander. But trying to get the subtleties of Evan, who, you know, Rainer feels a lot but doesn't say it. Xander feels a lot and says only the things that he feels are appropriate for public consumption, which are usually flirty and highly sexual. And Evan is not always sure what he feels. And he's a very analytical and rational thinker. So, and I'm not. I'm like a super emotional thinker. So writing his parts was hard because I had to get really into that analytical headspace and really like think before he took any action always, which is required a lot of concentration. But also he added a sort of steadiness to the story, and I got to explore his romance arc with Sylvie more, which was a lot of fun, and I love their relationship. And I also really wanted to show, I felt like I wanted to show why he liked her so much to begin with. Like what was it about her that stood out other than the fact that she's like very beautiful? And I feel like you really get to see him and understand why he loves her so much when you get his point of view. And we would have never understood that if we were in Sylvie's head. You know, like we just, because he's not somebody who's going to say that out loud. So that was kind of the choice, where Sylvie is much more assertive and much more likely to say, like as we see in the Storm King, is much more likely to put him in his place and say how she feels about things.
Well, I thought it was an interesting choice because we've said before, like Cece and Xander are very, very similar. They're both very chaotic. I
Yeah.
jokingly, lovingly call them the chaos twins. And Rainer tempers a lot of that in Cece. And I think when he's around Xander, if they didn't have that like love rivalry antagonism, I think he would temper a lot of it in Xander as well. But Evan
Totally.
really, really does. So I think it's interesting to have the two pairs of like the chaotic people and then people who rein them in as the four POVs.
Yeah, exactly. And it is a similar dynamic, and I think you get to see what that looks like romantically and what it looks like platonically in those two relationships.
So, what scene was your favorite to write, and what scene is your favorite to reread?
Oh, this is so hard. This is another one that I'm glad you sent me ahead of time, because I was like, I really had to think about it. One of the chapters that always stands out for me is chapter 22 in the Memory Curse, which is it's the ribbon scene. And it stands out because it's the ribbon scene, but it's also, for basically like a book and a half, we've seen Cece on her heels, like kind of trying to take everything in stride over and over. And it's the first moment where she kind of has a real pause to realize the way she pushed herself and like thought that she was choosing something for herself and really was kind of not listening to her instincts and not trusting herself. And she has this really raw conversation with Raynor, and it's not, there are elements of that moment that are sort of romantic, like him giving her the ribbon back and like giving her a pep talk and everything is very sweet and romantic. But like the stuff that she's saying to him in that moment, where she has this whole thing where she says like, men don't know what that's like to put yourself out there and to like risk everything and to get like basically to get like rocked, and then to be expected to like do it over and over again because the world doesn't expect men to show up like that, but it expects it from women all the time. And we really get to see her grow a lot through his eyes, and we get to see him realize like how much he has taken that for granted because he has seen that it is a thing that is easy for her, and he, I think, made some assumptions about it himself about like how easy that was. And as we all know as human beings, like being vulnerable is a really hard thing, and especially if you're always the person going first, which Cece is in basically all of her relationships. And she kind of has this really honest conversation with him about it, and I really love that moment because I feel like it's one of the most critical parts of Cece's story in terms of learning to like love herself and choose herself. And when Raynor gives her the ribbon and the spell for courage and says brave with my hand and brave with my heart, like that is the thing that always like stays with me in my brain, because that felt like a very almost like spiritual moment when I was writing it too. In that I didn't know what he said at first, and it took me a while to come up with it. And I knew like the essence of what I wanted it to say, but I couldn't think of a way to word it for a while. And then it just kind of came to me when I was on a walk the one day, and I was like, oh my God. And I like ran back to the house, and I had written it in my phone notes, but I like kind of sat down and finished the scene. And I think about that scene a lot in terms of how it kind of plays out through the rest of the story, because the ribbon keeps coming back, the saying keeps coming back, and it kind of becomes this call and response for them to check on each other, and to also hold each other accountable to be true to themselves in all of these different moments. So I think about that scene a lot. I also really I loved writing and rereading the scene in The Storm King where Cece and Xander finally have the fight that they never had at the end of The Memory Curse. Because he's kind of under this manipulation the whole time, she never really gets a chance to actually be angry at him for what he did. And he doesn't really ever get to hear how she, like, he's so in his own stuff that he doesn't even really ever think about the fact that they had two different relationships. Like when she says to him, like, of course you are happy, like you had a relationship with somebody who was completely honest with you and told you everything and risked everything while you stayed safe and like kept things from me. And that thing that she says to him in The Memory Curse too, where she says like, I've kept my vows and you've kept your secrets. And she, like in some respects, like knew that he was holding back, but she still gave him the grace in all of those moments. And she really is like really angry at him in that scene in The Storm King where he's like kind of being petulant and like not deciding. And she doesn't understand because she doesn't know that he's just found out about his parentage and all this other stuff and doesn't want to like weigh someone else down with that. But that's kind of like the instigation that allows her to have that moment of like really being angry, which is we see her have her like spicy moments where she gets like pissed off and stuff, but like that's the first time that she really lets him have it in that scene. And he needs to hear it too, because he has that complete breakdown afterwards when he, like, because she kind of busts the delusion that he's been operating under for all of this time. And it's really hard for him to let that go, because he's not just like surrendering the relationship and what it was. He's accepting the fact that, like, he kind of manufactured this thing, and while it was great for him, it was maybe like not quite the same for her. And I think, like, it's a really challenging scene for both of them. It puts both of them outside of their comfort zone, and they're both, she is vulnerable in a way that she hasn't really been with him in the past, which is like allowing herself to be really angry at him. And um he is really like emotional in a way that's the first time, like, he's emotional in the memory curse, but it's much more subtle and it's not really spoken, and he still keeps it together. And that's like the first scene in the entire series where he really like loses it. And again, it's because he feels very safe in that relationship with her. And then, sorry, it's so hard to pick one. And then in the Godless Kingdom, there's a few.
Hello again, listeners. If you haven't read The Godless Kingdom, there is a very slight spoiler coming up. It's not a huge spoiler, but just listen at your own risk. If you do want to skip, come back in 4 minutes.
When when Raynor's first sent to watch Cece, and he thinks that he's like walking into regular bodyguard duty, and she immediately starts like aggressively hitting on him, and he's so confused about what's happening. That scene was so much fun to write, like,
It
and
was
so
so
funny.
funny.
And just thinking about like how disorienting it would be that you think you're going to watch the king's fiance, and she is just like mercilessly hitting on you, and you're like, what is happening? Like, no wonder nobody wants this job. Like, what do I do? You know?
Yeah.
And he's so like a by the rules guy that I was like, this would be so funny, because I just know how uncomfortable he's going to be, and also confused, because they still have that bond and he's still very drawn to her, and like, how is he going to respond in that moment? So that was just like, a lot of the scenes in the book are really emotional and heavy, and that was a very fun scene to write. Oh shit, I forgot the one scene from Storm King. There's a scene from the Storm King with Sylvie and Xander where they're talking before he goes on one of his dates, and he's like saying all this lewd stuff to her, and she is just blowing right by it and just continuing to read his itinerary and like roasting him at the same time. And I love that scene so much, because we kind of see her at the beginning of the book going from being like really like sick of his shit to just kind of like taking it in stride and being like, yes, your highness, like, I'm sure they're all very impressed with your skills in bed, like, let's move it along, you know, like, your hair is messed up, let me fix you, you know. And I love getting to see their relationship. Sorry. And then in the Godless Kingdom, the part at the end where Raynor drops his sword and kind of is like done, you know, and Cece realizes it, and at first she like panics and thinks that he's wounded. It's one of the last, I wrote it in like an hour before I sent out arcs, and I knew it was just a thing that it had been bugging me for like weeks, that I felt like I hadn't quite captured the scene right. And I went back and wrote it into the scene with Michael and when the little boy that he's training. And I knew that it was kind of like in the essence of his character the whole time. But I wanted to give it like actual words and actions to kind of go along with it. So that because we're in Cece's point of view at the end of the book, that we would understand the significance of like what was happening, and like her relief in that moment to be like, oh my God, finally, like, I've been trying to get him to this point for 4 books, like, or like our entire lives together, and he's finally there. That's probably like one of my favorite moments in like the whole series. I really love that. And then when I was rereading, this is like every once in a while, a lot of coming back and rereading something on edits is like, oh God, what was I doing? But the scene in the Godless Kingdom, where Xander comes back to Isla and says, I don't need you to say yes. I just need you to give me the best maybe in my life. When I reread that, I was like, oh my God. I was like, I love this so much. And I feel like a genius. I didn't even remember writing it. And when I came back and I reread it, and I was like, I just feel like this is so perfect for him and where they are, because I knew that he couldn't have like a perfectly tied up romantic ending just given how the Storm King was, but I wanted the possibility to be there. And I was trying to find something to like capture that feeling. And I was so happy with how that whole scene was, because I love their relationship and I love how she really like doesn't give in to him very easily, and he likes that. Like, he is having a really good time with the challenge of it, and I love their whole dynamic, and that just felt like the cherry on the top for me. And every time I like go back and read that scene, I'm like, I love this scene so much.
Drew, do you have a favorite scene from books?
I mean, okay, my favorite scene to cry to, I guess.
Feels appropriate.
My favorite scene to cry to is, well, there's 2. Okay, one is in The Memory Curse when, Rainer is dying on the beach and he's, like, talking about all the things that they could, and they're, like, just they're both talking about the lives that they could have had together,
Mm-hmm.
and that just makes me cry, and in a sad way, obviously, but then coming, like, full circle moment, then going to the Godless Kingdom, the scene. You already know what I'm gonna say. If you haven't read The Godless Kingdom, I'd skip the next, like, 1 minute. Outside of, like, the final battle where Cece and Raynor, like, are outside the church and, like, they have that whole, like, conversation to each other, and then their bond snaps back together. Those 2 in conjunction make me cry for very different reasons, and it feels good. So I guess those are my favorite scenes.
Mine is, well, my favorite scene to cry to, personally, since that's what we're doing, is,
Part of the sad horny brand, it's fine.
it is, correct,
Of
yeah.
course, of course.
So in the Memory Curse, during the breakup scene when Cece goes to go get Xander and bring him back, they sleep together, and there's a couple of things that he says that I'm just like, oh, this is like the most heartbreaking thing I've ever read. Like, the Memory Curse, honestly, is just, the whole book is really, from like the halfway point to the end, is very heartbreaking. But he says something along the lines of, if this is the last time I get to hold you like this, then I don't want you to feel guilty about leaving, or something along those lines. And that was just like, really, it made me so sad for him, because he knew that that relationship was ending and he couldn't do anything about it, but he was also bound by the magic of his
Yeah.
bargain. And
Yeah.
then my more happy scene, obviously, in the Storm King, there's the library scene, which is a whole thing in and of itself, which we didn't talk about. We're not going to get into. We've been here for 3 hours, so we're not going to get into the library scene tonight. But it was the scene where Xander and Raynor sneak out, for lack of a better word, to go fight. And Xander realizes how happy he is, and how, like, not how happy he is, but how thankful he is to have Raynor fighting at his side, because he's an incredible warrior. And I was like, I just felt like that was a really nice, like, step in the right direction, and almost like resolution of their rivalry, because they didn't have to be rivals. They got to be on the same side.
Yeah, and that scene was so funny to write too, because I was like, I can just see him having that moment of being like, fuck. Like, I literally just tried to sleep with his fiance and now I have to ask him for help. Like, that is
Yeah.
the things that you do when you're king, is like, you gotta humble yourself before this person whose help you definitely don't deserve, and just like do it. And you know that he's gonna do it anyway because he's Raynor, and of course he is. And that's why, like, in that scene, I don't think that you ever have a moment of doubting that Raynor's going to do it. Like, Xander knows he's going to do it. And he's just trying to like distract Cece, who's going to be like the only impediment in this happening. And I love that scene too, because also, like you said, he and Cece are the Chaos Twins. And so they have similar instincts in a fight also. So Raynor kind of knows sort of what to expect, and he is a little more prepared, even like when he is like reminded as they're out there fighting, and he is like reminding Xander that like we're one heartbeat away from Vincent being in charge, like get the fuck behind me, like I really love their like growing friendship.
Yeah, one last thing I absolutely adored, because Sheila, I just want Xander and Raynor to be besties. Like, that's my dream. Um, is the ongoing internal monologue that Xander has about Raynor. And I think I said this before, but if either one of them was gay, or if one of their genders was swapped, they would be set up like ripe for a romantic pairing, because the whole time, especially in the Storm King, Xander's internal monologue is like, oh, Raynor's nice big thighs. Raynor is such a good fighter. I want to have a glass of whiskey with Raynor. Like,
it is funny though, because I feel like they have like a natural tension between them, just like a lot of people want Kato and Cece to be together because they have a natural tension between each other too. All of the Kato girls out there, and guys, I think like it is funny. Like, I do think that they get a different appreciation. I think for Raynor, Xander's a little more of an acquired taste. Like, he's a little harder to win over, I think.
Hi, listeners, me again. If you haven't read The Godless Kingdom, I would skip the next 4 minutes. So I was just gonna say that reminds me too of the scene in the church in The Godless Kingdom when Cece and Raynor are having their little steamy moment, and then Xander walks in and he has to make a comment like, "Oh, okay, well I see
oh,
why I see why Cece's having such a good time with you, Raynor," or something like that, right? It's like, "Put that thing away."
okay,
I
I'm actually
love
really
that.
glad. I'm glad that I let you go first, because I wanted to bring up the scene right after that, where Xander tells Raynor to put his dick away, and then like basically grabs him, drags him out, and is like, "You fucking asshole, do your best to fucking remember, or you're gonna be in we're in deep shit right now. This is like,
Yeah.
you
I
got to
like
get it
that, yeah.
together."
That was a good friendship moment. Like, I feel like they are, like, pretty solidified as friends.
Well, it's funny because Raynor says he's like expecting sympathy from Xander, like at that moment, but Xander's pissed. He's like got rage in his face. And he's like, "You need to get your fucking shit together, man."
That is
Yeah.
good to have Xander be mad at Raynor. I feel like that's not usually happening, right?
Yeah, well, I was thinking about it a lot, and even when you think about over the course of their relationship, at the beginning of The Lost God, we don't find this out until later, but Xander has been watching Cece and by proxy Raynor for a year without either of them being super aware of it, and so he has the
Or
benefit
romance.
of watching their relationship from afar and having an understanding of Raynor that Raynor has to kind of like catch up on for him. And so it's kind of taken a long time for them to get there. And then when he forgets, he's kind of lost all of that. And I'm like, what is his perception of Xander going to be when they like essentially meet again for the first time, which is he's like, God, I hate that guy. Why is he such an asshole to me? Like why is he so impatient with me? And meanwhile, Xander's like, how the fuck can you forget her? Like, you know. And I just think like the dynamic between them in that book is like so funny. But you also do see, I think, through the course of the whole series, how much Xander understands Raynor and his instincts, like even in how he plays them in the first book. Like, he's made a study of the two of them and their dynamic to understand exactly how Raynor's going to react in all of these different scenarios. He knew enough to get them separated, you know, and like what is the only thing that would make Raynor leave Cece? And it's if he thinks he's the bigger threat, you know?
Yeah. Well, I think that's all I've got. Sheila, is there anything else you wanted to share before we say goodnight?
No, I'm just so grateful for you guys for having me on for such a long time. Sorry I
Oh,
talked
of
so
Thank
much.
course.
you.
No, please. We're happy to have you. Happy to have you for as many hours as you want to be here.
This was great, and I had such a good time, and I'm happy to come on and talk books with you guys anytime. I love getting to talk about what we were reading too, and anytime I can force other people to read what I'm reading is like my dream. So
Just Leo, thanks.
yes, Leo things, exactly.
All right. Well, I hope you guys have a good night. I'm real tired. I'm gonna go to bed.
You too. All right, thanks for having me, guys.
Yes,
Of
thank
course. Have
you.
a good night, everyone.
Bye.
Bye. Thanks for hanging out with us today, guys. Follow us on Instagram at Bound and Book Podcast. My personal Instagram is at Undercover Faye.
You can find me over at HJK Reads. That's my initials. It's a fun time over there.
And you can find me at Nancy Reads and Writes on Instagram as well.
Thanks for reading with us, motherfuckers. Bye.
Bye.
I am